We are back. Welcome back to the Fantasy 5 podcast brought to you by the Sideline Sports Network. I'm your host, JT, and today we're going to be covering the Week 9 preview. We've got injuries to talk about, waiver wire pickups to discuss, and the bet slip, where I bring you my literal bet slip for tonight's Thursday night football games, go over my bets with you, and hopefully get you guys some money. So that's going to be coming up at the end of the show. You're going to want to stick here for that. But without further ado, let's hop right into injuries. No time to waste. We've got several key guys that went down over the last week. Few of them marked as questionable, one doubtful. So I'm going to go ahead and talk to you guys about some stars who aren't looking too hot right now. First up, Cooper Kupp. He hurt his right ankle near the end of last week's game in San Francisco, but it actually doesn't sound to be too serious. He was held out of practice on Wednesday, but he did manage to get in today, and he should continue to do so in some capacity tomorrow as well. However, his volume could take a hit depending on how the flow of the game goes against Tampa Bay on Sunday. They're probably not going to push him too hard, especially if they were to get out to some sort of lead. Though it's been tough to come by for the Rams, but it's also been tough to come by for the Tampa Bay Bucs as well. So a couple struggling teams. Who knows what could happen? He could have a pretty limited day. Next up, Jonathan Taylor for the Colts. He didn't practice today or yesterday. In his media availability, their head coach, Frank Reich, described his injury as a tweak, but he did acknowledge the fact that Taylor isn't 100%. So the team's just going to monitor him throughout the rest of the week to see where he's at. So he's still up in the air. However, over the last couple hours, I'm not sure exactly when it was, but his fantasy projection went from whatever it was to 0. Deion Jackson's went up. They're back up now that they lost Nyheim Hines. So somebody to keep your eye on for sure. I would right now classify him as doubtful. He's in there as questionable, but when all of your fantasy points go away in the flash, sounds like it's not too good. So somebody to keep your eye on as well. Next up, Keenan Allen for the Chargers. Their head coach, Brandon Staley, said to the media that the treatment hasn't been responding as they'd hoped, but in all reality, Keenan Allen told several reporters that he re-injured his hamstring last week while they were on their bye, while he was in rehab. He didn't practice on Monday or Wednesday after logging a pretty dismal first half performance on week 7 before their bye, but he hasn't been able to get too much going, especially with the injuries that he's been dealing with. So next up, we've got Chuba Hubbard. He's going to be suiting up this week in all likelihood against the Bengals. He missed week 8 with an ankle injury, but he came into the week and he's practiced every day. So I'm honestly not even really mentioning Chuba Hubbard's name for his fantasy outlook, but it's more so for Deonta Foreman's, because while Deonta Foreman had a monster game against the Falcons last week, it's kind of unlikely that he's going to be able to make it a trend, especially if Chuba comes back and takes away some of the touches. So lastly, we've got Brandon Cooks. He doesn't even have a real injury per se, but he's been ruled out for tonight's game for a personal reason. What a storyline. I find this to be hilarious every time when you go online and you see a player is designated as out for a personal reason, when in all reality, they just don't want to be there for the team. He said before the trade deadline that, he was in my mind, the number one guy that was going to be leaving before the trade deadline, but the Texans didn't deal him. They didn't get any value for him. So he basically said, no, I'm not coming in today. So I'm all for a mental health day and all, but that's a whole nother level when it comes to NFL football. Had to include him, just something I felt like I had to add in. But that's going to do it for your injuries today. So we're going to move right along to the waiver wire pickups. 5 guys. I should have clarified it earlier. Shout out 5 guys. I had 5 guys yesterday for lunch. Fantastic. I should have clarified this earlier, a couple weeks ago, or whenever I started, more like. But whenever I have somebody on my waiver wire, that means he's available in over 50% of the leagues. I'm not going to be, handing you guys duds who you're not going to be able to find anyway if you were to want to pick them up. So with that said, let's hop into number 1, Deion Jackson. As I just talked about, Jonathan Taylor's, edging toward doubtful, not looking too good for his Sunday. So as his, status dwindles, Deion Jackson's likely or has shot up the waiver wire. As I said earlier, his projection just recently went from whatever it was, 15.6 or something, down to 0, whereas Deion Jackson's went up to 13.8 fantasy points. So that's a pretty good score for a star running back, for any kind of running back. So look to him to be a great backup for you. In the 2 games that he played, without Jonathan Taylor a few weeks ago. He tallied 104 rushing yards and 108 receiving yards total. That's over 100 yards a game. You can't really ask for much more. So you can look to him as a solid RB2 or flex play for this week. However, as Zach Moss from the trade deadline with the Bills, as he continues to learn the playbook and kind of establish himself in the offense, Jackson's touches are probably going to go down a little bit. So your best bet to use him is going to be this week, but see how he does this week, and perhaps he can really kind of command some touches whenever they get into big leads or something like that. Next up, Devin Duvernay with the Ravens. Right now, we're currently talking about the Ravens wide receiver 1 for the foreseeable future because Bateman is now set for surgery. That's going to end his season. But Devin Duvernay hasn't really had a noteworthy season so far, but he has, he shows spots of that raw talent that can't be denied. And the Saints defense gives up tons of points, so wide receivers specifically. So Devin Duvernay is worth picking up this week to see how he adjusts to his increased role. If he does well, he could, his value is definitely going to rise. He could be a sell-off. He could be a stash. Excuse me. He's got a lot of different utilities right now. Next up, we've got Greg Dulcich for the Broncos. He's an interesting tight end right here. He's just played the last 3 weeks. I'm not sure exactly why he didn't play the first 5 or whatever it was, but he's played the last 3 and he's logged over 10 points in his last 3 contests. So the Broncos are on a bye right now this week, but if your team does happen to be struggling to find like a consistent tight end, there's a lot of variability in that position this year. So if you're looking for some consistency, it looks like Greg Dulcich is going to be your guy for the time being. Next up, we've got Kyren Williams for the Rams. Talked about him a couple weeks ago. I've got him on here again. He's currently on the IR with a high ankle sprain, but he should be back to practice by next week. Sean McVay said there's a chance that they do take him off the IR before their next game on Sunday, which could allow him to get some like immediate time, which would be fantastic. If you can get some time and see Kyren Williams get some reps in, get some rushes, I imagine he's going to be, in all the leagues because he's going to be a breakout player. So scoop him up this week, stash him. He's going to be a pretty elite weapon. So keep an eye on that. And lastly, we've got Allen Robinson on the same team, the Rams. He's finally shown up. He had a brutal start to the year. Everybody was dogging him, saying that he was washed. It was over with for him. But he's come on lately in the last couple of weeks. He's finally showed that he can still run routes, get catches, command touches. So they play the Bucs on Sunday. As I said before, it could be a pretty brutal game. And with Cooper Kupp potentially missing time, as I said, or at the very least on a snap count, Robinson has another opportunity here to, kind of restart that resurgence for him. So that's going to do it for our waiver wire pickups. And we're going to move right into the bet slip. Love having the bet slip back. We did a sober October of betting on the podcast, but we're back now. As I said, we're on a massive heater, 25-9 over the last few days. So let's go ahead and get right into it. I've got a sack special here to start it off. I'm a little hesitant to go with sack bets as far as props go, but I'm going to go ahead and do half units here on all 3 of these. I'm going to give you 3 players that I think all could get sacks. Shooting for 1, I'm sure we'll get 1. Love to get 2 out of 3 of these guys to each get a sack for the Eagles. It's pretty obvious Davis Mills is going to be running his ass off today, just trying to make anything happen that he can, especially with Brandon Cooks being out, as I said. So first up, we've got Hassan Reddick over 1.5 or over half a sack at plus 120, and then the other 2 guys are plus 170. We've got Javon Hargrave and Brandon Graham. Both of these guys or all 3 of these guys are on the Eagles, and all 3 of these guys have shown that they can get to the quarterback. Hassan Reddick, I believe, Hassan Reddick's leading the team, 5.5 sacks, and Javon Hargrave and Brandon Graham each have 3. So they've shown it so far, and hopefully they're going to be able to do it tonight against Davis Mills, who, as I said, is going to have to make something happen because chances are they're going to get into a deficit early. So look for that sack lunch party. And next up, we've got Kazir White over 5.5 tackles. He's another Philly linebacker. He's not one of those guys that's going to rush the quarterback, get a sack, although I'm sure that now that I just said that, he's going to. But nonetheless, I see him being a big part of today's game plan. Dameon Pierce is going to have to run up the middle, just try and get some chunk yardage. depending on what down it is and stuff like that. So Kazir Whites has been playing a ton of snaps for the Birds this year. So I've got him over 5.5 tackles at -114. Next up, OJ Howard, veteran tight end. He's been dealt around the league for the last couple years, but I've got him. It's just 2 receptions I need for him today, +110, over 1.5. Seems like a pretty reachable feat, especially as I said, Brandon Cooks is out and Nico Collins is out. They've got so many backups in for the receiving core that chances are they're going to be able to turn over and look for the dump offs to the tight ends, whether it's OJ Howard, who's technically the tight end 2, or Jordan Brevin, I believe his name is Brevin Jordan, as their tight end 1. So Brevin Jordan or whoever it is, he was projected to over 2.5. So I figured I'd take the safe play with OJ Howard over 1.5. And next up, we've got the under. It's tough. This is a tough one, but I've got the under here, and that's because I could see, at the very most, I could see the Birds jumping out to a big lead or just, building on a lead the entire game. But I don't see, I could have bet the under for the fourth quarter, but I didn't. I decided to go with the under for the game because I just don't see a lot of points being scored here. That's simple as that. And lastly, we've got Dameon Pierce, over 66.5 rushing yards at -113. He's an absolute dog. The Texans are going to have to use every ounce of his skill today, whether it's going to be out of the backfield or just running. And I certainly see him, he's done it at least 2 games where he's gotten like 75-yard runs that would cash it right there. And I thought about that when I was debating going over with the rush yards or going over with the rushing and receiving combined. But it was that fact, the fact that he can break off those massive runs and just sneak right past the entire defense that is gonna have me betting the over 66.5 rushing yards here. So we've got that at -113. I'm feeling pretty confident about these games, so I'm clearly going to go 0-5. But in all seriousness, I think you guys should take them because I like all these bets. And Luna helped them out too. She's the one who's picking them out. She's the one who's winning. So all credit to the most high dog. And that's going to do it for your show today, guys. Thanks very much for tuning in. That's been the NFL Week 9 preview on the Fantasy 5 podcast, and we'll see you next time.